Hey, good morning, y'all. Josh's Severe Weather. Happy Wednesday to you. We're going to talk tropics here, and we're going to focus the majority of this video on Hurricane Lee and its expected impacts to Bermuda, to New England, and to Atlantic Canada. I'm also going to talk a little bit about Hurricane Margot and about the next potentially major hurricane that we need to keep an eye on as we head into next week. So I'm going to share my screen with you all here and show you what looks like a growing storm here as Hurricane Lee is poised to move northward here, passing by Bermuda here later on tomorrow into tomorrow night, and then taking aim at New England late Friday and affecting eastern New England and Atlantic Canada this upcoming weekend. So a pretty big storm. It's only going to get bigger here. Here's a wide view, and you can see for the time being things are well out to sea, but Lee is going to begin that northward turn here, already moving northwest at 6 miles per hour, expected to make more of a right turn and pass close to Bermuda here later tomorrow night. Hurricane Margot is probably peaking in intensity. Right now it's moving northward. It should slow down. And then we've got another area of interest. This is investigation area AL97. And right now showing a west-northwesterly track across the central Atlantic. The chance it could become a depression here is 40% by Friday morning and 80% by this time next week. And quite likely we could even have a tropical storm. The next name on the list would be Nigel. Here's a look at the visible satellite imagery, and you can see really just two storms that we have our eyes on, and they have our eyes on us apparently, and they're holding hands here under the nose. This is Category 3 Hurricane Lee with winds of 115 miles per hour, very clearly here on the map. This is Bermuda right here. The storm beginning to make that right turn and likely to head up in this direction and maybe bend back towards eastern New England, kind of fitting its way into the Gulf of Maine and the Bay of Fundy here over the weekend. This is Hurricane Margot, and it does have a small eye with it, probably getting close to its peak intensity with winds of 85 miles per hour. Maybe it strengthens just a tiny bit more. And the two are holding hands here. It kind of looks like a nose or a mouth or something here. I'm just going to put a little smile on the map for you guys. Sorry, I'm trying to have fun. I know these are dangerous storms. And then off of the Atlantic, we've got a very disorganized area that models are developing into our next named system here sometime next week. Here's a look at the infrared imagery, and you can see again, large Hurricane Lee. We're going to talk, I'll show you kind of more of a zoomed in view of that. Not quite as large, but decent sized Hurricane Margot. And then disorganization here, AL97, that we're going to keep an eye on as models show once Lee and Margot move away and the wind shear lessens, we do have yet another potential tropical system, which would be Nigel. And that's something I'm going to talk about later in the video. The Gulf is very quiet. The Caribbean remains very quiet. And we've got a pretty strong front moving slowly through the eastern United States. And that has led to some really nasty weather here in the mid-Atlantic region. Severe weather overnight in the Baltimore area, flooding as well. Severe weather overnight in eastern Maryland, Delaware, and South Jersey. So a really rough start to our day here across parts of the mid-Atlantic states. That front's going to slowly move away. And the good news is that Thursday and especially Friday are going to be quite nice here across the eastern United States. It cools down and it'll turn a lot less humid as we get our false fall number 2. I call it false fall because it will be warming back up again, as you might expect here in the middle of September. Pretty busy as well over the southwest. You can see a lot of mid-level moisture spreading from Arizona and New Mexico into western Texas. And we do have the risk for some heavy rainfall and some severe weather over parts of Texas and southern Oklahoma. Not really going to dive much into that today. We're not expecting anything extraordinary, but obviously a cold front across the area, so it's not going to be as hot as it has been, and certainly it'll be cloudier and more unsettled. In the central Atlantic, you can see Lee, which will begin to pull away to the north and west here. You can see here's our next invest area here, and very disorganized for the time being, but we eventually look to see some form of a circulation form somewhere in here, and that track's going to take it up in this direction, very close to where Lee tracked, maybe a little bit east of where Lee tracked. Let's see if I can make this a little bit darker or a little bit thicker here. Good try. But anyway, you can see right now it's not of immediate concern, but something we're going to keep an eye on. Now, Hurricane Lee is growing in size. You will see that the core of the storm is eroded somewhat with some dry air on the northwest side here. A little bit of westerly wind shear has gotten into Lee. It's not going to strengthen any more than it has. It looked like yesterday the models all showed intensification. However, Lee had a mind of its own and decided to replace its eye wall with a bigger eye wall, which means the storm is growing but not intensifying. When you look at hurricanes, you got to look at obviously the core of it and where the strongest winds are. And if those strengthen, and certainly we saw that over the weekend as Category 5 Hurricane Lee was out there, then the winds hit from the west and sheared the storm, and it weakened back down to Category 2. Now it's growing in size, but not as strong in the middle. The reason why is that the eye wall actually contracted, formed a second eye wall, and you can see that that eye wall is starting to fill in here. However, I think we're done with intensification. So you can see, even though the storm is powerful, it's in the place we thought it would be several days ago. The internal dynamics have been extremely challenging to predict. So we've seen some surprises with that. But it doesn't really change the big picture of what we're here to expect over the coming days. You can see here the current intensity is 115 miles per hour, pressure 948 millibars or hectopascals. The storm is moving northwestward. It will take a bend to the right and move more northerly tonight and tomorrow as it slowly weakens into cooler water. It will be a Category 2 hurricane by this evening, and then down to Category 1 by tomorrow night into early in the day on Friday, as the storm passes a couple hundred miles to the west of Bermuda. It is expected to move north-northeast in response to a trough, but then begin to bend back to the north and even north-northwest. And that bend, of course, is significant for those of us on Cape Cod and on the Massachusetts coastline and the New Hampshire and the Maine seacoast. There's a possibility that bend could be a little farther to the west, taking the storm very close to Cape Cod and towards Portland, Maine. There's an equal chance that the storm does not make the bend or turns back to the northeast and comes through southwestern Nova Scotia, although landfall should be west of Halifax. But the average of the model trends right now has landfall over far eastern Maine near Eastport and then tracking across New Brunswick. You will also see that the maximum sustained winds are expected to weaken below hurricane intensity as it hits cooler water. The faster the storm, the slower it'll be to weaken. The slower it is, the more rain and wind we get, but the weaker the system gets because it spends more time over waters that will be down to about 16 to 18 degrees Celsius, which is below 70 Fahrenheit. It's actually about 65 Fahrenheit. So the cooler waters are definitely there waiting for Lee, but the acceleration is what we're also going to be watching. The good news is that this is not going to be as damaging a storm for New Brunswick and for Prince Edward Island and for the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And even eastern Quebec as winds do weaken, but it'll be a big one. So a lot of rain is expected and still some strong wind, even though it'll be a tropical storm. This is the official graphic from the National Hurricane Center. We see a couple things here. First, we see that the wind field is growing. Hurricane force winds are going to come by just west of Bermuda here overnight tomorrow night. We now have a tropical storm warning for Bermuda. I do think as we get into probably tomorrow morning around this time, we may start to see tropical storm watches posted here for parts of coastal New England, certainly by Friday afternoon, as the storm is expected to make landfall late Saturday night or early on Sunday. It could speed up to the point where landfall could happen Saturday afternoon. It could be a little slower and landfall could be in the morning on Sunday. The average of the two is around midnight here, Saturday night, Sunday morning, and then acceleration to the northeast, tracking across the Gulf of St. Lawrence and away from New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island by Sunday evening, and then just an extra tropical storm that will no longer be tropical here by the time we get to Sunday night and Monday. The wind swath, you can see while the storm was at its strongest over in here, it was not a very wide storm compared to where it is now. You can see in the last 24 hours, things have grown in size. Hurricane force winds cover over 2.5 degrees of longitude and 2.5 degrees of latitude. So a very big storm. That's why I'm concerned about Bermuda, as tropical storm force winds are predicted to go over that island here later tomorrow night. Even though winds should be weakening, at that point, we will likely have a Category 2 hurricane. Only one model still has it a Category 3, that's a UK Met, which is not a typically skilled model when it comes to these kinds of storms. And we do have several models that do show this getting enough wind shear and moving over enough cool water where it comes down even to Category 1. So it's very possible this could only be a Category 1 by the time it moves west of Bermuda. That's still a strong storm. Don't get me wrong, 90 miles per hour is still a lot of wind, but certainly not what it is right now and what it's been. So some encouraging news there. And you can see the rate of weakening is not super fast between tomorrow night and Saturday afternoon. Then it starts dropping off when we hit those colder waters later Saturday into Saturday night. So kind of two interesting competing factors. One, the forward speed. And the other, the water temperatures. The faster the forward speed, the less that it gets to cool down and weaken the storm. The slower the speed, the more rain and wind we get, but the faster it weakens. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword if you think about it that way. Models are all in really good agreement that it bends back to the left here. Only one model at this point, the HAFS tropical model, has it coming close enough to Cape Cod to produce near hurricane force conditions. The others are a little farther offshore, and there are some timing differences. You can see the HAFS is slower here by about 12 hours with our landfall, showing it on Sunday afternoon near Bar Harbor, whereas the other models are anywhere from about Eastport over into the Bay of Fundy to even the southwestern tip of Nova Scotia around Yarmouth or just down the coast from Yarmouth. But either way, this is definitely, I don't want to say encouraging news, but news that allows the storm to kind of fit the gap here where it will go over the coldest waters and weaken. We also see a more tightly clustered forecast track now, which is good. I think this will continue to be tightly clustered and that the models all come to an agreement. So I think if you split the difference here, we're looking at far eastern Maine and western New Brunswick here with that landfall point sometime here on Saturday afternoon or night. The ensembles, you can see they continue to trend back to the left a little bit. This black line is the average of all of them. Officially, the average does not make landfall in the U.S. It has it coming up the Bay of Fundy and hitting New Brunswick. But if this trend continues, Maine certainly could still see that direct impact. Either way, it's going to be affecting Maine, so don't get too fixed on this line. It's just where the lowest pressures are going to happen. Here's a look when the earliest reasonable arrival time of tropical storm force winds will be in Bermuda. That's going to be around 2 in the morning. As we start seeing tropical storm conditions, and the worst will come during the afternoon and evening hours, and then the storm pulls away late tomorrow night into early Friday. Tropical storm force winds could move onto the island south of Cape Cod as soon as 8 p.m. on Friday. More likely, they're coming later Friday evening and Friday night. And then we could see tropical storm winds moving into Maine and Nova Scotia here around daybreak on Saturday, with those stronger winds moving up into northern Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, northern Maine, eastern Quebec, Prince Edward Island here by Saturday evening, and then possibly getting up farther into the Gulf of St. Lawrence by late Saturday night, early Sunday morning over eastern Quebec and western Newfoundland. Tropical storm force wind probabilities, you can see there's a really good chance of tropical storm force winds. That's why I think this area will be under a tropical storm warning probably by Friday morning, anywhere from Cape Cod over to Maine, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. Because of the size of the storm, I can't see the Hurricane Center and the government's not issuing a tropical storm warning. Could there even be a hurricane watch? Certainly. I mean, we have to keep an eye on that. If it bends back to the west a little quicker, then Cape Cod and the islands could even have a hurricane watch. I don't think we're going to see that in Canada, but we'll have to take a look at it. This, by the way, is the growing size of Hurricane Margot, not affecting any land at 40 west. You can see the GEFS. This is the ensemble forecast system from the GFS, is a little to the right. It has that landfall point over southwestern New Brunswick. But the deterministic, the operational GFS makes more of a sharp turn and has landfall down the coast from Eastport and across far eastern Maine. Because remember, that part of Maine sticks out to about 67 degrees west longitude where the storm is now. So if it went due north right now, it would go west of Bermuda and go straight into eastern Maine and western New Brunswick and staying west of Nova Scotia. But there are ensembles that come back as far west as Cape Cod and down to Portland, Maine, and there are ensembles as far east as Halifax or even just riding the coast of Nova Scotia and hitting Newfoundland as a weakening system. You can see the ensemble spread has definitely gotten less and less. This is what we like to see when we want to make a more confident forecast. I know the National Hurricane Center says it's too early to make a call on impacts here in this area. I think we're starting to get more into the window where we have more confidence in that window is shutting and that we do have a pretty good idea of where the impacts are going to be felt. But you can see there's still a growing ellipse here. And the main thing that makes things difficult to predict here as we get, this is Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock, is that we still have some solutions that do not have the system even up to the latitude of Cape Cod and the islands yet. And we have others that are already coming into southwestern Nova Scotia. So there's some timing concerns here in that things could still be a little bit quicker or a little bit slower. And once we get more of more confidence and a smaller amount of spread, then we can obviously have a more confident forecast. And that should probably come around this time tomorrow morning, because at that point we'll be less than 60 hours from landfall, assuming no timing differences. So still a little bit of uncertainty here, but The track path is pretty good here. I mean, ensembles, you have the outliers that typically don't do well. Unless we see the trend all going to one group of outliers, and of course, we got to stick with the trend. So you can see the bend to the left and then the bend back to the right. And I'm going to show you why that's going to happen in just a minute here. Here's our probability of tropical storm force winds. And you can see this is through tomorrow at 8 p.m. And we see on the European ensemble, it's kind of just clipping Bermuda here tomorrow night, but a higher chance here into Cape Cod than Bermuda even. You can see kind of an 80% chance of tropical storm force winds here over coastal parts of Cape Cod. And I believe this is Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard. I think it's Nantucket's the one on the right. If I'm wrong, you can correct me. That's fine. I'm never right all the time. But then you can see a 90% chance here for tropical storm force winds is predicted here on Saturday night and Sunday over not down East Maine, but far eastern Maine and southwestern New Brunswick, not quite to Moncton. Even an 80% chance of tropical storm force winds in places like Yarmouth, Moncton, and over to like Augusta and Bar Harbor and those areas. And, it's a big enough chance to where I think it's pretty likely going to happen. And then as far as hurricane chances, hurricane force winds, you can see that none of the ensembles are projecting that this will have sustained winds over 74 miles per hour at any point, except potentially clipping Cape Cod and the eastern islands here. By the time we get into Canada, we are not predicting hurricane force winds. The storm will go over enough cold water where it should be a weaker system at that point. An impactful system, yes, but the winds will not be that strong, comparatively speaking, to storms like Fiona and storms like even the New England hurricane and Bob, if you want to compare. So here's a look at the upper level pattern. You can see there's a big trough that's going to move eastward across the Great Lakes this afternoon and tonight. A strong ridge over Newfoundland and just east of Canada. You can see this trough is what's turning the storm north, keeping it away from even affecting the southeast and bringing more influence into Bermuda. But that trough is going to lift away here on Friday, and a ridge of high pressure builds back in to the north and east of the storm. And the stronger that ridge, the more of a left turn I think we're going to be looking at. Right now, that does not take it directly into New England, but it takes it a lot closer than what it looked like a few days ago due to the strength of this ridge building to the east of Lee. Now, as the next trough starts moving in, you see these colder colors here moving in on Saturday. We start to see a bend back to the right. If that is quicker, this is more of a Nova Scotia storm. If it's slower, it's more of a Maine storm. Right now, it's probably Maine and New Brunswick, to be honest with you all, as this ridge gets pushed east by this approaching trough, which is going to bring some unsettled weather in early next week to the Great Lakes and keep the temperatures on the cooler than average side. After that moves away, we will start to see a ridge rebuild later next week, and that's what we're watching for the next potential system after that. Here is the 0Z GFS operational. Just to give you an idea of the wind field here, pressures are going to come up, but the wind field grows. Look how much it's growing here on Friday. And you can see the strongest winds are going to be approaching Cape Cod here Friday night into early Saturday morning, around 2 in the morning. And then that wind field does shrink, but it still is a big enough wind field to bring all these strong winds up into eastern New England and western parts of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. And then that wind field does weaken considerably as the storm weakens quickly over cooler waters and then over land. But still a pretty big storm. I mean, we're still talking winds that are going to be 50 miles per hour coming up the Bay of Fundy. That's going to bring some incredible waves into an area that usually has the highest tides in the world. So think of all the wave action that's out there from a storm this big, and then just kind of shove it all up into this Gulf of Maine, into Nova Scotia, or into the Bay of Fundy. You're going to have a lot of coastal flooding, a lot of nasty surge and surf here across this area, and that is certainly significant. Oh, by the way, the next system looks like potentially a threat to Bermuda, but does not look like a direct threat to the eastern seaboard. This is, a week from today, and we're seeing another hurricane in the Bermuda Triangle. Unfortunately, this would be Nigel, so we're going to have to keep an eye on that one. Models are not yet honing in on the exact track of that. I'm going to show you another model a little bit later that looks different than this that we need to keep an eye on. But the Gulf should be pretty quiet for a while. Here's a wide view of the GFS. You can see this is Lee, this is Margot. And as we get on past this week and into the weekend, we could see our next tropical depression, or Nigel at this point. That would be Friday night or Saturday. The GFS, you can see, brings a storm into eastern Maine, western New Brunswick, Saturday afternoon and evening. Here's Margot, which is beginning to weaken, and here is developing Nigel over the weekend into a tropical storm. After these two storms move away, a ridge rebuilds. That tends to take the track more to the northwest than due north, so it's not recurving yet. It's going along the southern edge of that ridge. And then you can see a strengthening storm very close to where Lee was yesterday, a little bit farther north and east as we get to next Tuesday and Wednesday. The 0Z GFS has the storm becoming its strongest near Bermuda here next Wednesday. So if you're in Bermuda and you're under a tropical storm warning now, don't be completely shocked if we have another tropical storm watch or warning, or even a hurricane watch if this track is correct in less than a week from today. So if you're in Bermuda, this is really a bad time to be vacationing if this track holds. You can see that this run of the GFS does not threaten the East Coast. It takes the storm out to sea. It does have two weaker systems behind it, maybe Ophelia and Philippe, but these don't look to be as intense at this point, and they're still too off in the future to accurately predict as well. Here's a look at the European control, and I do want to show this to you guys because it is important. The European control turns the system back a little bit closer here to Eastern Cape Cod on Saturday, and then moves it due north into Maine, hitting directly from the south. After that, it turns away and weakens to the northeast early next week. It's got Margot kind of hitting this ridge and drifting back to the west, and at the same time, it's got Nigel forming by Sunday and Monday. This keeps Nigel very close to where Lee tracked and intensifies it in the exact same place as where Lee was strengthening. Probably not going to be a Category 5. The waters have cooled considerably in the wake here of Lee, but potentially a Category 2 or 3 here, according to the European control. And you can see the track here is just west of Bermuda. This would be really bad news for Bermuda, but it's not until next Friday. The GFS has Bermuda potentially getting hit next Wednesday night by Nigel. The European control has it not until Friday morning and afternoon, and then taking a path. I mean, I didn't just copy and paste Lee's track here on the Nigel, but that's exactly what it's showing. And that's amazing to see a storm track that follows the one right before it. Not that that's never happened, but if that does happen, boy, would that be really bad. The two storms about a week apart, but I will say this is still 11, 12 days in the future. We just can't make a reliable forecast on a storm track for a storm that hasn't even developed. But the European control says, hey, this is going to be just like Lee, taking the exact same track. So I want you guys on the eastern seaboard and in Bermuda and Atlantic Canada just to be aware at that point that you may not be finished. Not saying batten down the hatches yet next weekend. We don't know yet where this is eventually going to go, but this is like 50 miles away. This is like deja vu all over again. The control does not develop the two systems after it. That may actually be correct. I don't know if we're going to see development beyond Nigel at this point. Here's a look at a closer view of this European control, and you can see here's Lee, and it's a little bit farther west than the GFS, but has that main landfall. Then we get a break, high pressure builds in. Here is Nigel, just west of Bermuda right here, and then tracking in almost the same place, going right over Yarmouth, Nova Scotia into New Brunswick here next weekend, the 23rd and the 24th. So just keep an eye on it. I really don't want people to panic. This is too far in the future to make an accurate forecast, but the European operational is very close to the control. It's got the system going just west of the GFS, right into eastern Maine, where I've been kind of expecting it to go, to be honest with you all. It's got very quickly weakening Margot here at the end of the weekend. Then it's got Nigel beginning to strengthen next Tuesday and Wednesday in the exact same place as where Lee strengthened, or a little bit later, but in the same track, going a little bit closer to Bermuda than what Lee is doing, about a degree of longitude closer, with that nearest approach coming next Friday, the 22nd. Here's a look at expected winds, maximum gusts on Bermuda. You'll see by tomorrow afternoon, actually by this afternoon, I'm sorry, we'll see wind gusts up to 36 to 40 miles per hour on Bermuda. Those are the highest gusts, not sustained winds. As we get to tonight, later on, we'll see wind gusts over 40 to as high as 45 to 50 miles per hour. Tomorrow morning in Bermuda, 50 to 55 mile per hour wind gusts. Tomorrow afternoon, 60 to 70 mile per hour wind gusts. And then tomorrow night, 63 to 72 mile per hour wind gusts. So not expecting hurricane force winds on Bermuda, but higher end tropical storm force winds, moderate to high end. So definitely the potential for a few power outages coming later tomorrow into tomorrow night. After that, things should quiet down. I did want to show you what the European does to Bermuda next week, because it ain't pretty. You can see here, this is next Thursday night, Friday, and then here comes potentially Hurricane Nigel. And you can see next Friday, it's got wind gusts of 80 to 90 miles per hour on Bermuda. with stronger winds off to the north and west. Again, a 10-day forecast is not going to be reliable. I'm just showing you what the model's showing today. I expect that it'll probably change by this time tomorrow. The Canadian is in pretty good agreement with the European here on the storm track. You can see it making that left turn, actually kind of more like the GFS, and then making more of a right turn and scraping the coast of Nova Scotia as a slowing and weakening system. So it does differ once we get past Saturday. It does have Margot weakening as expected, and then it's got Nigel a little bit farther to the right and strengthening and kind of going more into a weakness between this building ridge and the ridge off to the east. So the Canadian model says this is not going to be a direct threat to Bermuda. It's actually going to go by to the east. But either way, it's close enough. Either way, we've got all the models showing this next storm within 300 miles of Bermuda sometime between next Wednesday night and next Friday morning. So Bermuda, you're under a tropical storm warning now. I think you'll probably be under one again if these tracks hold around this time next week. It does show the next system potentially developing here. This would be Ophelia, but it stays pretty weak here late next week. It does not threaten Atlantic Canada. You've got high pressure building in on the Canadian model. It may have tropical storm Ophelia, and we'll keep an eye on the next wave. It could be Philippe by next weekend or around the 25th or so. Here's a look at expected wind gusts from the European. These are strong wind gusts. You can see near the coast, we're looking at gusts over 25 miles per hour Friday morning. And then 40 miles per hour on Block Island, 40 miles per hour on the Cape and Islands here late Friday. And then as we get into Friday night, that's when the winds will get to their strongest. We're seeing potentially hurricane force winds over eastern Cape Cod and the islands, even 40 mile per hour wind gusts in places like Providence and Boston, 50 mile per hour in places like Taunton, 60 to 63 in Plymouth. So I do think Barnstable County and the islands will be under a hurricane warning from this if the storm gets this close. We're seeing wind gusts as high as 90 miles per hour. The main coast, I think, probably just a tropical storm warning, as winds will be weaker at that point, 50 to 60 miles per hour from the European. Closer view shows you here these winds, and you can see 80 to 90 mile per hour gusts are possible on Saturday here on eastern Cape Cod and over the eastern islands, even as high as 40 to 50 miles per hour in the Hamptons and on Montauk Point, 40 miles per hour in Connecticut, western and central Mass, New Hampshire. Stronger winds here over the mountainous range here. The presidential range could see gusts over 60 miles per hour. Mount Washington might see 100, who knows? But the main seacoast, certainly some stronger winds in here. And the other thing I want to mention too is the precipitation could get pretty high, as we see amounts here as high as 4 inches, maybe even 5 inches on the coast, and then 2 to 3 inches in parts of Maine and Massachusetts. So you don't need any more rain in Massachusetts, but unfortunately, we are going to see this heavier rain moving up here as we get into late Friday night, and especially Saturday morning is when our heaviest rain falls. And then in Maine, it'd be Saturday afternoon. Here's a view of Maine and the winds that we're expecting here, 50 to 60 mile per hour potential gusts along and east to 95. This would arrive on Saturday morning. Gusts maybe as high as 40 miles per hour, a little bit farther inland, and gusts as high as 70 miles per hour coming up through the Bay of Fundy, 60 to 70 miles per hour in Nova Scotia here on the western coast. In kilometers per hour, that puts you at 80 to 110 kilometers per hour in places like Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, 70 to 80 kilometers per hour around Halifax, and 60 to 70 around Moncton, with higher amounts on the south coast of New Brunswick. St. John's could see wind gusts over 50 to 60 kilometers per hour. Prince Edward Island, 60 to 70 kilometers per hour, maybe even 80 kilometers per hour here in Charlottetown. And then obviously over the Gulf of St. Lawrence, we could have some stronger wind as well. Oh, by the way, just looking at the next system. Oh, no, we don't go out that far. Okay, good. Anyway, yeah, here's a real quick look at the Eastern Atlantic, and nothing of organization at this point. Here is a look at Hurricane Margot. It does have an eye now. It is lacking really the amount of water temperature to get it to strengthen anymore, but it could hold its eye here for the next few hours. You can see it on satellite, a little bit of cirrus inside of it, but a warming and clearing eye otherwise. So Margot not as strong as Lee, but a growing storm out there, and that will only threaten shipping lanes. Winds are expected to weaken down to 80 miles per hour this time tomorrow morning, 75 miles per hour on Friday, and back to tropical storm strength as we get to the weekend and it reaches cooler water. The ensembles continue to trend to the right. They make a bit of a clockwise loop here as it runs into high pressure, and eventually the average of the models takes it northeast, but there's some more uncertainty at that point, and wind speeds should start coming down after this afternoon. Here's AL97. It does not look organized at this point. You can't even really see much of a low-level circulation, but there is kind of a bit of a twist right here. So it's still got probably a couple days before it becomes our next depression, number 15. And then a couple more days after that before it becomes Nigel. I think by Sunday, we probably have Tropical Storm Nigel. Models all show it tracking west-northwest and then maybe a bend back to the left as high pressure rebuilds, all going well to the north and east of the Caribbean islands. So some great news there. And if you look longer into the future, the European operational model goes west of Bermuda. The control goes west of Bermuda. Let me circle Bermuda for you guys here. Here's Bermuda. And we've got the control and the operational all going west, but the average of the ensembles going to the east. And right now, I tend to lean more towards the ensemble mean, but it's very possible this could come back to the west here and really threaten Bermuda. So it's still a little bit it's too early to really get too caught up in it. But at the same time, I want you to know if you're in Bermuda that this is something we definitely need to keep an eye on here as we get to later next week. Intensity forecasts all show this becoming a hurricane in about 5 to 6 days, some making it a strong hurricane in about 7 days. And again, it's a little bit too sudden to make that call if it's going to be a strong major hurricane or just a hurricane of category 1 or 2 strength. But we do see that strengthening starting here over the weekend into tropical storm force. And then as we get to about next Monday morning, probably a hurricane. And we see pressures dropping down to 970 here on the HAFS. Here are the islands. So this is very close to where Lee came, maybe just a notch to the right of Lee. But we could have a carbon copy storm here. So that's what I'll be watching for you all. Thank you so much for your time today. I really do hope that if you're not a subscriber, you become one. As a meteorologist, there's some hype involved in these graphics, but at the same time, I really just want people to be prepared for potentially the worst. And once I give you the all clear, I can give you the all clear. But it would mean a lot to me if you could help me grow my channel. We've seen some great growth this month. My goal was 10,000 subscribers at the end of the year. I think we'll be at 15,000 before the end of the month, which is wonderful. Because I really do believe I've got a lot of folks in my life here that I can bless. I believe that I can bless you all with accurate forecasts. So really appreciate y'all's time. I give all the glory to God. He has created me. He's created you. He's given me this gift to share weather information with you all as a degreed meteorologist. And I can't go a single day without acknowledging that every day is a blessing. Whether or not you tend to believe in God, I just think you have to understand that the fact that you're here is a blessing, no matter what you believe. But I personally believe that Jesus Christ is my Savior. He died on the cross for me, and the world does not want people to believe in Jesus, to believe in the resurrection, to believe that God created us. The world does not want us to believe that, although many of us do believe that. But what I will say is that Paul tells the Romans church, 12:2, King James Version, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. And I realize there are some of you watching right now that are like, okay, he's a Jesus freak. I just don't want to hear it, blah, blah, blah. That's great, but not for me. Thanks for the weather. No thanks for the faith. Look, I understand completely, but I'm not here to conform and please you. I'm here to please God. And I just want you to be very clear on that. For 30 years of my life, I did not transform to God. I was not a believer. I was somebody who was in a very dark spot, just kind of in a negative environment. Did not know what my future held, did not believe in God, did not believe in eternal life through Jesus Christ. But thank God that my mind was opened. I was able to get around folks that were believers. I was open at least attending church. And eventually I realized there was a bigger plan for me, that God created me so that I could love him back the way that he loved me. And I just wanted to share that good news with you because I think it's encouraging. It allows me to go out there, go out on a limb, be more courageous, be bolder in what I do every day, because I know that this is pleasing to God, not necessarily to you, the viewer, but to God. And I just pray that maybe you're somebody who, if you're struggling in your faith, would at least be open to that. Maybe not accept it, but at least be open to it. Because I think all you got to do is just have an open mind, understand people with different beliefs, why they believe it. And because of that, you're already being blessed. So I would love to pray for you or over you. If you have any prayer requests, I do believe that prayer works and that it makes a difference. And in the face of any tragedies that we may go through in our lives, that prayer can bring us back all together, at least for some moment. And that's what pleases God. And that's honestly what I wanted to share with you. That's that gospel. That's that great news. Not to beat you over the head with the Bible, but to show you that what I do is because I'm here to please God and go through what is acceptable to Him, and not necessarily to you. No offense, but I don't care what you think. I care what God thinks. So anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I wish you many blessings. We'll talk again tomorrow morning. Take care.